Stanford University.
Welcome. Welcome to the 2020 Stanford Contemplation by Design Summit. My name is Dr. Tia Rich, and I'm the founder and director of Contemplation by Design. And this morning's session, Working for Freedom on All Fronts, the Radical Dharma Framework for Liberation, brings us the opportunity to be in direct learning experience with the authors of the inspiring and transformative book, Radical Dharma. For those of you who have not already read it, here is the book. I encourage you to get it and carry forth what you will gain today by further engagement with that book. Our teachers are Dr. Jasmine Syedullah. Jasmine is a Black feminist political theorist of abolition. She holds the first assistant professor line in Vassar College's Africana Studies program, celebrating its 51st anniversary this year. Her current research centers the fugitive writings of formerly enslaved mother Harriet Jacobs and her abolitionist vision of freedom. Before joining the faculty at Vassar, Syedullah taught at the University of San Francisco and the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she completed her PhD in politics with a designated emphasis in feminist studies and history of consciousness. Jasmine is a core member of the Radical Dharma Movement Project, bringing embodied practices of liberation to spaces of social justice, community organizing, and institutional change. In addition to Dr. Syedullah, we have Lama Rod Owens to guide us through our experience today. Lama Rod Owens was officially recognized by the Kyodo School of Tibetan Buddhism after receiving his teaching authorization from his teacher, the Venerable Lama Norla Rinpoche, when he completed the 3-year silent retreat program at Kagyu Tupten Choling Monastery. During this retreat, he dealt with years of past pain and trauma and found forgiveness and compassion for himself, which he views as a critical step before truly being able to help others. Without further ado, we welcome our primary teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia, and thank you, Mia. This is such a joy. As Tia said just a few minutes ago, we did seed the ideas for this event a couple seasons ago, and so it's just an honor and a privilege and a kind of dream come true to be able to bring it to you all today. I'm Jasmine Syedullah, and I'm here with my partner in crime and liberation, Lama Rod Owens. So I want to start with a talk. I'm an academic, so I wrote it down, and I'm gonna share with you some thoughts about how I, in my journey as an academic, an activist, and a Buddhist, am integrating all of the lessons about freedom that we have been inheriting from our cultures, from our politics, from our spiritualities. The integration of these ideals and practices of freedom is what we need right now instead of more separation. And so I begin with a quote from Zenju Earthland Manuel Sensei. She says, "Everyone and everything come out of darkness. Therefore, it is everywhere and in everything. Only our limited perception distorts this truth." So we begin. Before the Buddha found enlightenment, he lived a life of privilege. He followed the path of his own dissatisfaction and stepped back from his birthright to see himself and the world more clearly. This is the practice. It begins with noticing where you stand and how it feels to stand there. While the Buddha enjoyed the many comforts of his privilege, as was his birthright, when he noticed where he stood blinded him to the rest of the world and the ways they lived, he stepped back and bore witness to the suffering of sickness, old age, and death. While his privilege provided comfort, it also shielded him from the truth of suffering, which was, no matter the skin you're in, utterly inescapable. He found there was no real safety in privilege. He found the violence of ignorance was inescapable as well, and also a major source of suffering. Not just sickness, old age, and death, but ignorance of suffering too. The delusions, deceptions, and mirages that keep some of those with the greatest proximity to power in states of physical and spiritual paralysis in the face of the suffering of others. After many years of searching for the answer to ignorance, the Buddha found the only refuge from suffering, the only safety from the emergent struggles of our daily existence lie in awakening. Over the last 20 years or so, my friends, mentor, teacher, Dharma siblings, and co-authors, Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams and Lama Rod Owens, who's with us today, have been sowing the seeds of a new Dharma, informed by the truth of their embodied experience of intersectionality, awakening, and liberation. As Reverend Angel writes in the introduction of Radical Dharma, there is only one way to observe the constructs that lead to harm and suffering out in the world. We must first see and account for those closest to home, those that make us feel most at home. When we account for the things that are making us feel most at home and make us feel at home, and then imagine how those things can be democratized to others, we begin to do the work, that they're not just ours, but they're a necessary condition for our collective survival, right? Sitting is itself a simple practice for bearing witness to that which recedes from notice, that which we have blinders on, Seeing and accounting for what is, stepping back from our patterns to observe them more clearly, without judgment, we come to see truths hidden right under our nose. In the book and in the spaces the book has seeded throughout Western Buddhism and beyond, Radical Dharma is holding dynamic and embodied space for healing the harm of white supremacy backwards by noticing now where we left parts of ourself behind in order to belong, to progress, to feel at home. We notice when we choose security over freedom, to reap the privileges of our belonging rather than resist the seductions of individualism, exceptionalism, and dominance by aligning with those most separated from centers of power and structural resources of collective survival. This idea that our proximity to power is what we need to be interrogating, even more than our identity, is huge. And I've been really grilling it into my students because my students are so indoctrinated in that narrative of identity politics, wherein if I account for my race, gender, class, all of the different aspects of my identity, then I have accounted for myself. But what all of those things are code for, what all of those things are encrypting, are proximities to power. And power, as we know, has no bounds, has no boxes, has no borders. It moves in ways that can undermine our desire to stay on the right side of it. So by being honest about our proximity to power, we start to deconstruct our relationship to race, gender, and sexual identity in ways that actually reveal the asymmetries of power, right? The dissimilar relationships to power that exist within those affinity groups that oftentimes we forget about, right? We're like, oh yeah, I'm Black and I'm proud and I'm part of the revolutionary class. But wait, isn't Colin Powell part of this identity? Isn't Clarence Thomas? Like, are those people that I want to align myself with? Absolutely not. And so therefore, Black solidarity is not sufficient for me to say what it is I'm actually orienting myself in and against, right? And so being able to understand your proximity power can really start to get us out of those boxes and into action. We notice when we choose security over freedom to reap the privileges of our belonging rather than resist the seductions of individualism, exceptionalism, and dominance by aligning with those most separated from centers of power and structural resources of collective survival. For me, that's about aligning with folks who don't have college degrees. It's about aligning with people who don't have PhDs and learning from them, right? Understanding that their lived experience is actually the kind of knowledge at this point that I need most. I don't actually need more indoctrination into the academy. I need to decolonize and unlearn the elitism of those spaces in order to be able to understand what it means to stand in solidarity with folks who haven't been in my shoes, right? This year has been a year of collective contemplation about the meaning of collective survival, a deep and complicated, as we were talking about with Lama Rod Owens last night, a complicated embodied practice in the real material truth of our interdependence, interconnection, and co-created consequences of our self-determination. And I'll say that again, the co-created consequences of our self-determination. For those of us who stand, stay, and seek refuge within the borders of the United States, this has been an especially challenging meditation. It's one that directly counters generations of frontier-forged notions of rugged individualism, personal responsibility, retributive justice, and settler colonial justifications for vigilante violence, mob rule, and piracy, straight up piracy, the stealing of lands, cultures, languages, peoples, and labor that were not theirs to take. We are addicted to the delusions of violence, domination, and control of others, and we have to admit that first. We are ignorant to the effects of this addiction on our spirits, on our earth, and on future generations. And I think bringing in our relationship to the earth is something that Lama Rod does really, really well. And it helps me remember in this season of autumn, in this season of fall, what it is that I need to let go of. What is Mother Earth telling me to release in a ritualized way? Because we hold on to so much. Someone was recently in a teaching sharing that we have so much focus on abundance in our kind of healing justice communities, and what we don't realize is that we also are holding an abundance of grief and an abundance of pain that we don't know how to let go of. And so being able to be in relationship with the earth rather than running away from her becomes a way to ask, can you hold this with me? I'm so sorry for taking so much from you and from being part of the culture that's benefiting from your destruction. I think I can begin to heal that history if you can work with me to heal myself, if you can help me in this one last instance and hold one more thing. So safety then from suffering, safety from suffering is delusion. And this delusion is the foundation of our ideals of freedom in the wild, wild west. No one escapes the seductions of this imagination of freedom that values property over people, contract over custom. We need to aim for something more than safety, right? We need to fight for our collective survival. And that means that we are already unsafe. The first truth of this delusion that safety is freedom is an enlightenment logic, and it's a live free or die logic. It's a freedom's only accountability is to itself logic. It's an abstract concept that cannot provide shelter, it cannot provide food, it cannot provide love, it doesn't teach us how to care. In defense of this imperative, however, we practice of success by competition, entitlement, and displacement. We've depleted the land, colonized its people, and called their subjection their salvation. Sitting with the truth of suffering that lives in our world is especially challenging for those living, standing, and taking refuge on this land who are most directly benefiting from their proximity to power. And that's many of the people on this call. That's myself. That's my parents, even. Those who have been able to find a way out of no way to climb up out of the reaches of poverty and benefit off of a system of capitalism that is cannibalizing those that we leave behind. Be it by way of citizenship status, race, gender, or sexual orientation privilege, our access to education, our ability to procure safe housing and healthy food or healthcare, all of these are privileges. All of these are things that not everyone is able to enjoy. That the strength and security of quote unquote our well being occasions far too many quote unquote others to suffer premature death from the myriad sicknesses of the mind and body that plague the globe seems utterly untenable. What we are facing today is the need for a Dharma that teaches us to turn towards that to which we have been so blind, that to which we have been so fearful or shameful, to face the contradictions we inhabit and seek retreat into the true birthright of Western quote unquote privilege, which is a retreat into the birthright of taking how we take, practicing taking responsibility and accountability for generations of abuse of proximity to power. It's time for this country to grow up. It's time for this country to grow up. And in this moment, we've seen how important it is for this country to grow up. In an especially memorable Dharma talk from Reverend Angel several years ago called Growing Up to Wake Up, Reverend Angel said, and delivered this gem, this axiom. She has so many axioms, thank goodness, because I need many. I'm so grateful there are so many, but she said, growing up to wake up means that it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. How do we look at this world, look at the injustice, experience it directly, interrogate our experience and how it sits with us, understand that this is not a ball we set in motion, and yet it is a fire we can put out. It is a ball that we can stop. It is a place for us to stand. How do we stand? How do we take responsibility? How do we act in this moment? The systemization of suffering from colony to captive, from plantation to prison, from state-sanctioned violence to pandemic virus is never totalizing. Never totalizing. There have always been fugitives from proximities to power. Those who use their proximity to power against the narrative scripts and purposes to which we were originally set. Damien M. Sojourner is a dear friend with a beautiful family who lives out on the West Coast, Black studies scholar. And in a text on radical Black politics, he wrote, "Time represents the ideological manifestation of freedom." And he writes in a dense way. So time represents the ideological manifestation of freedom. Whatever ideologies, to use Marx, whatever ruling epochs of any moment are the ruling epochs of the ruling class, that is designated not only to ideas, but time, how we prioritize, how we pace, how we understand what time it is. The ability, he says, going back to his quote, the ability to wield time for one's material benefit is a central part of the Western educative process. Time is money. How you use time matters. And so if you can outpace someone else, right? I feel like I've been trying to outpace myself for decades. I'm trying to stop that now. He goes on to say, Black radical time is not something that is employed to be inflicted upon people. Rather, it is central to organizing against structures of domination, such as prisons, the education system, a means to analyze and break away from Western time-induced trappings, creating a politics based upon love of community and shared human experience. Again, now we're thinking about time as a way of protecting community, as a way of ensuring future generations, not just as an abstract metric for measuring our success against some abstract ideal of what it is we're supposed to be getting ours. So like, I can get mine so you can get yours or whatever. Put another way, proximity to power over time has never been exclusive to the will of any one person, or even wholly limited to the interests of the most privileged portions of the world's populations, though these are the stories that we tell ourselves. How we tell time, how we discern what time it is for ourselves and our communities with or against the press of structural power matters, not just for our own liberation, but for that of our ancestors and for future generations, right? So, how we use this contemplative space is not just about self improvement. This is not just about saving our souls or healing our wounds. It's about healing backwards. It's about healing the wounds of those who came before us because they didn't have time to do much other than get us here. They got us here so we can do this work that they didn't get the chance to continue doing. Sitting, meditating, yoga, journaling, writing, poetry, humming, songs, taking time, keeping time, time to sit, time to stay, time for the bell or to bow, time to wait for the teacher, time to wake up. Time keeping against the press of the outside world is always already part of this Dharma practice. Our job today, through the course of this workshop, is to bring that practice of timekeeping out of the monastery, out of our cushions, off the mats, and into the places we live, stand, and take refuge in, into our communities, into our relationships with our families, our partners, and our children, into our campus communities with our faculty and students and staff, into our organizations and our social movements and our institutions, and dare I say, into local, state, and federal government. There is a blueprint for another pedagogy of freedom to be learned from the stillness of sitting in close proximity to power over time. In retreats from the norms of urgency and productivity, a subversive space can be seated. From daily Dharma practices to the renegade choices of everyday people to stay human, in the words of singer-songwriter Michael Franti, we can come over time to unlearn our frontier-forged individualism and choose instead to prioritize relationship over recognition, freedom over security, collective safety over personal privilege. Along a continuum of radical disruptions of the tyranny of Western time, the press of progress, and the emergency we have co-created just by means of our existence, Dharma folks have been curating ways to pass on to future generations lessons for honoring life and living well, born well before the West was one, quote unquote. What we are seeing today is that existential emergencies do not travel alone. Just as our systems of oppression are interconnected, as we learn from the teachers we know as the Combahee River Collective in the sacred text of their 1977 statement, so too are the effects of their mutually assured self-destruction. These interrelated structures of oppression, also their destruction is interrelated as well. So we see national uprising against the pandemic of anti-Black violence and calls to defund and abolish the police in the wake of the police killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, arriving along with the global pandemic of the coronavirus and alongside climate collapse, alongside economic depression, in concert with the rise of fascism and the everyday apocalypse of being stateless, undocumented, unhoused, unemployed, Black, queer, trans of color, incarcerated, or otherwise too poor to matter. From fires of protest in June and July, through a September so hot the western sea line was consumed in smoke plumes that blocked the sun and wildfires that turned morning skies red. It's been a summer of sensory overload, overwhelm, loss, and grief, and loss. We watched how untenable living in a constant state of hyperstimulation has been for us and our families and our communities, and how impossible it is to sit still and stay silent. So we're becoming more familiar with the unfamiliar feeling of waking up each morning exhausted, bracing with held breath for the shock of news threads streaming headlines of science fiction, horror, and catastrophe, stressing our nervous system so much, literally, y'all, it made me sick to my stomach all summer. I'm only just starting to get my digestive system back on track. The Buddhist teachings ask us to take our seat in the world seriously and to see it, sit with it, and wake up to it and keep watch. We are all watchers now, patrolling for danger everywhere from neighborhoods to news threads. In Zoom rooms and on grocery checkout lines like heat-seeking missiles, we're all learning to flatten the curve, track traces, avoid contagion, limit the spread. But even while we're being conscripted by already existing institutions of surveillance to watch each other, many of us are still unskilled in the work of watching out for each other, watching out for ourselves as we watch out for each other, watching out for those most vulnerable to dis-ease, to those most exposed to the elements. As protocols for containing corona become more clear, the virus of white supremacy continues to rage largely unchecked, overlooked and undetected. Heightened levels of watching are still underscored and organized by ideals of personal responsibility, and I didn't put this in there, but I should have, the dyad of perpetrator-victim binaries, right? I'm the innocent, you're the perpetrator, as opposed to we all live in a culture that's perpetrating and benefiting off of settler colonialism, the prison industrial complex, right? Nationalism. So really deconstructing those ideals of personal responsibility, individualism, self-interest, distracting from our ability to see white supremacy at work within our protocols of safety, security, and refuge. Both those who benefit from global structures of domination and those who are never meant to survive, we all have proximities to power that we can leverage against the forces that are keeping us away from each other towards something like collective liberation. It might not be a perpetuated status of unity, but all we need is moments. We just need moments of coming together that will accumulate into some kind of change. Over time, we have to practice it in order to reach it, right? So over time, we follow the path of our own dissatisfaction with ourselves, with our environment, with the future that we see laid out before us, with the past that we've inherited. We follow our own dissatisfaction and learn to make home wherever we are, transforming the very seat of our suffering from the inside out into a space of healing, into a space of connection, into spaces of possibility and hope. Bearing witness to ourselves and stepping back from the construct of the consciousness that sits is a powerful way to begin. But what there's just too little of in Western Buddhism today, and why Lama Rod and Reverend Angel and so many Black Buddhists of color, folks of color are doing this work in a different kind of way, is because frankly, cultural traditions of practice that pass down everyday practical ways to step back from the self that sits and into beloved community with others, not just those who share our taste and interests or a proximity to power, but those whose experiences are so different. Like, these are the things that people of color and Black folks are doing in the Dharma, right? Is that we're turning to those whose experiences are so different from ours that we can be really taught to see through the blinds, veils, and borders of our comfort zones towards a different future, towards a different path. To more clearly see the world and ourselves, we need each other to teach each other's truths. We need to listen to each other's stories and integrate different perspectives, not just to fortify our own, not just to prove that we know it all, though that is such a seductive one, but for the sake of our collective survival, of the delusions we have co-created over generations of looking out for and paying attention only to ourselves and our tribal fellows. From ego to exceptionalism to supremacy, the I's obscurations are inexhaustible, and transforming them is a constant practice. So when the ego yields then to the cause of collective survival, a space for healing emerges. A space for healing the wounds of white supremacy as it lands on Black and brown peoples, as it lands on white bodies, as it lands on the earth, as it lands on us all. On stateless, undocumented, and on us all. Healing also emerges for what Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams refers to as this notion of healing backwards, healing the wounds of any whose liberation has been marred by the prevalence of white supremacy and anti-Blackness, and that, of course, includes white folks too. The space of stillness and the healing power of our attention gets beneath both the relative and absolute distortions of perception that Reverend Angel was speaking about a couple nights ago. To break our addictions and transform our delusions, as I recite in the Sangha, in my Sangha, before we say the meal, before we eat our meal, we have a meal gata. And one of the things that we say is that we're committed to break our addictions and transform our delusions. And for me in particular, that really resonates. All who take refuge in this radical Dharma are welcome as survivors of nationalism, elitism, white supremacy, patriarchy, rape culture, heterosexism, name it. What are you surviving? That's actually the first part, right? Is naming what we're surviving or what we're asking the earth to help us survive, asking our communities to help us survive. The first step, as Reverend Angel said, is to disarm ourselves, which means knowing how our proximity to power has been weaponized, usually without our will, sometimes without our knowledge, against those who have been given little way to defend themselves against us. Working with the body to heal the parts of ourselves we have donated to intersecting structures of oppression requires breath, requires dance, requires tears, requires voice, movement, practice, patience. It is only then that we can come to understand where we stand, whose path we were on, so we can know what time it is and move as one as necessary. And you just got the Radical Dharma 5. That is it. That is it right there. I'll say it again. Come to know where we stand, what we hold there, whose path we are on, so we can know what time it is and move as necessary. The Radical Dharma 5 is a contemplative approach. A contemplative approach is really about knowing where you stand, taking account of your relationship to where you're taking refuge, as Lama Rod was leading us through yesterday, right? The embodied approach he was also working us towards yesterday is what are we holding and where are we holding it? I know that I hold an incredible amount of rage in my jaw. I grind my teeth all night. And I'm working on, Pamela does that too. I'm working on trying to figure out how to disarm the part of myself that wants to keep working even when I'm sleeping. My eye doctor said when I blink, I don't completely close my eyes. So my eyes are constantly exposed to the elements and are drying out. And I need to learn to rest. I need to learn to be still, right? So the contemplative approach for me is all about the embodied practice for me is all about noticing how I hold tension and how I don't let it go, how I like store it up as if I'm not going to get any more of it. And that's when you start to notice, oh, I'm addicted to my anxiety. I'm addicted to my control issues. I'm addicted to like whatever it is that you're holding on to, right? Grief. And when it starts to turn your body against your will to live, something else is necessary. Yes, those feelings arise for a good reason. Of course, I think of my anxiety as a superhero power. There's no way I would have gotten this far without it. And if it's the only thing I know how to use, then it's using me, actually. And if it's using me, then you best believe that the intersecting structures of oppression are moving through it to move me against my will, right? And I can feel it in my energy when I come to class with like, I want to throw everything at my students. And they're like, whoa, right? So I have to be really mindful through embodied practices of how to begin to decolonize my own habituated patterns of survival, right? So where do you stand? What are you holding? What path are you on? Are you on a path that has been set up for you by the culture that you've inherited? Is it working for you? Do you know who's behind you? Do you know what's coming? Are you on board with this path? A liberatory path is not a compulsory path, right? A liberatory path is a path of choice, a path of choosing an intention. And in order to recognize that you are on a liberatory path, you might have to leave the path that you're on. The first section of Radical Dharma, Lama Rod Owens, Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams, and I give narrations of what we had to leave behind. For those of you who are college students or showing up here to be part of these conversations, you are way ahead of where I was at your age, because I wasn't ready to do that kind of self work. I was overwhelmed by how much I had been repressing for the 2 decades of my life to not make my Blackness be a problem for other people, because I could tell that it was, and I'm a caretaker. So I was trying to be like, oh, how can I make it better for you that I'm Black? How can I make it easier for you or less threatening, right? That was the path I was on. Once I started to sit, I noticed that I was on that path. I had to grieve that I was on that path. And I had to leave. I had to figure out how to, and I didn't know where I was going. I hadn't found Reverend Angel yet. I had a book, but I didn't know she was like a person I could become, in relationship with, I did not find my Sangha until much later, but I knew I had to leave that path. And so I did my best to try and eventually found my people. Thank goodness. They're always a text message away. Give thanks. What path are you on, right? What time is it? If you don't know what path it is you're on, then the time, like we said, when we're talking about Damien Sojourner's piece, time is being dictated by the ground you're walking on, right? By the ideologies that are shaping the direction that you're walking. And so if you really want to know what time it is, you have to leave the path, right? Join liberation and then read the writing on the wall. That's prophetic praxis. Being able to understand and work with what is, the world as it is, and being able to see the world as it is requires creating a lot more space in our hearts for forgiveness, for ourselves, for our wounds, so that we can actually see beyond those things, to be able to imagine what time it is in terms of our collective survival. This is about integrating our personal process of healing with a politics of collective survival. Right? And then we can move as one. Then we're moving as one. And obviously these things don't just happen like first one and the other and the other. Like we have to kind of figure it out all at once. So for those of us who are adept at kind of social scientific protocols of order of operations, we're going to have to let that go. We might have to work collectively before we can even sit to be mindful of what we're holding, right? And then we'll go back to the collective once we've gotten some sitting, and then, whatever it is. The pattern is errant, it's fugitive. And I use that term very, very intentionally. I don't just use it as an analogy. I draw from the history of the anti-slavery movement. And when I studied the anti-slavery movement for my scholarship, what I found was that those who were most instructive to me about what fugitivity means were not the people in organizations in the North. They were not the people developing the print media that was disseminating information about abolition far and wide. Actually, they were the everyday forms of dissent, of divestment from slavery that were happening on plantations in the middle of containment. How do we resist when there is nowhere to go? How do we abdicate? How do we stop abdicating our power and act for a future that we can't even see, right? Fugitive slaves were creating the future of freedom within the container of confinement. And those are the lessons that we need right now. We need to figure out how to stay fugitive even within spaces of captivity, because that's our reality in this moment. So this is the Radical Dharma 5 approach. It's a contemplative approach, an embodied practice, a liberatory path, a prophetic praxis, and a collective process, all steeped in contemplative technologies of fugitive homemaking and the ancestral wisdom traditions of those who came before us. In addition to the RD5, this is what we lovingly call the RD5. I personally also make it a practice, as you've already seen in this talk, of turning to those who were never meant to survive for guidance on how to save my community, my spirit, and how to heal backwards. For me, poverty scholarship is essential for this work. Those people whose lived collective survival, their direct experience of poverty, incarceration, statelessness, and disease, help those who are learning to survive those things and are learning to live into the limits and contradictions of liberty and justice for all. Those are my teachers, y'all. Those are the people you need to be bringing to Stanford. Those are the folks who taught me how to stay on a path of liberation, even when the path of success was so seductive, even when the path of self-aggrandizement was so seductive. So part of what we're working on in this space is really connecting what it means to defund the police. So I have two answers. One is my Black Lives Matter hat answer. So as a member of Black Lives Matter, Hudson Valley, defunding the police really means taking seriously that the history of policing has been linked to histories of anti-Black violence, and beginning to understand that the kinds of one-shop stop answers that we have in our communities to issues of violence, safety, mental health, employment, housing, so many, education, cannot all be solved by calling the police. And if we invested more money in the community services that support housing, employment, education, after-school programs, then we wouldn't need the police for the kinds of things that we call them for today. Sending all of our resources into security forces actually creates more dependence on guns and violence and force to create safety, rather than relationships and healing, in order to instill in our communities the resilience and the hope and trust, flexibility and love to create the kind of communities that we want to see in this world. We've already learned from history that punishment is insufficient to creating the kinds of resilient communities that we need to thrive and grow. In the work that we're doing today, I want us to think about defunding the police in a very different way. I want us to think about the fact that we all are implicated in the intersections of policing, caging, surveillance, and punishment that make up the prison industrial complex. That those logics of punishment for wrongdoing are so ingrained in our personal psyches that we wield them against ourselves. We wield them against our neighbors and friends and family. We don't know how to not call the police when something goes wrong in our own lives. And now I'm not even talking about actually calling the police. I'm talking about all the ways we bypass the root causes of conflict in our own bodies, in our own relationships to ourselves and each other, and try to get someone else to deal with it in ways that actually bypass the root causes of the problem. So when I think about defunding the police as a political agenda, Yes, reimagining, protect, and serve, like Melinda just said, right? What does it mean to protect and serve the spaces that we reside in, the seat that holds us, right? Our relationship to the earth is primary. Defunding the police might look like taking very seriously our relationship as a settler colonial nation to the indigenous communities that still exist within our borders, right? What is our accountability to them, right? So when people are calling for accountability to the police, I feel called in, right? I don't feel like I get to be self-righteously like, yeah, you better hold those cops accountable, da 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 da. I actually say, right, so how am I implicated? What is my role in being more accountable to these systems of intersecting oppression? So I'm afraid I don't have a simple answer. It's not an either or. I think this is the work that we need to figure out how to do. You can call it whatever you want, but I mean, and people are calling this a summer of reckoning, but I think it's about a turn from personal responsibility to collective accountability. That's really how I see it. Is that this is the time for collective accountability, and if we continue to use binary frameworks for accountability, we're just going to keep perpetuating the same problem over and over again. They're the wrongdoers. I'm the innocent. They fucked up. I'm on the right side of history. That's not going to work for anyone anymore. So we all have to put that one down. I think you did it just now. Boom, drop mic. You just did it, right? A, you spoke your truth. You spoke it very well. B, you're calling folks, you're saying it in a space where you know folks are going to have your back, right? This is a space, radical Dharma spaces are spaces where you start to be able to find your people, right? These are the people who share. I saw a lot of nodding heads. People were feeling that calling, right? And so your voice gets bigger when it's combined with the voices of others, right? And then it's about knowing that, guess what? So I've been asked to do a lot of repping for people of color in Buddhist Dharma spaces, which is funny to me because I'm not a teacher and I'm a pretty bad Buddhist, but but I'm but but in so doing, I had to do some work and be like, who came before me? Are there other people of color who have been doing this? Yes. And if we were in my home, I would be able to pull off the shelf all the books that I had pulled just for this talk. But there are a number of literatures to draw from by people of color that have been published in American Dharma spaces that have seeded this conversation now for generations. And so knowing that you're not alone, right? Not in the immediate space or not in a lineage space, and that it's time for others to listen. I mean, it is, again, really, really seductive to call out the entitlement of white folks because they're so good at it. But I have to admit, I notice the spaces in which my entitlement gets in the way all the time. Like I have not um yes, I feel entitled to living. I haven't figured out yet. I haven't had the degree of grief and loss yet that has registered to me how tenuous my right to live is. Right? So that is like my parents were very protective. I had a very loving family, very limited amounts of violence. I haven't lost anyone very, very, very close to me. Like it's been a very protected space. And I can tell when I talk to people who have been close to a lot of loss and a lot of grief that I myself have this like thoughtless entitlement that I'm just going to be here. And so I just want to put that out there, right? That whiteness and entitlement certainly do go together quite well, but they're not exclusively seeing each other. So just noticing the ways that entitlement can sneak up on any of us can give us a little bit of compassion for the space that folks take up sometimes with it, but then also make that be all the more reason to take up the space you occupy, to use your voice, to take that risk. It was incredibly counterintuitive to me to use my postdoctoral time to write a non-academic book, to co-author a non-academic project. And yet it's yielded these conversations in these communities in the academy, right? So once again, I left that path that I was on, not knowing where I was going, found my people, and found enough momentum that it's actually better for me to be on this path, this fugitive path. It's more, there's more integrity here, and there's more nourishment. There's like more juice here, right? So yes, it feels risky. Yes, it feels unknown and uncertain. But there's mad folks out here, and they are ready to band with you and create those refuge spaces, those maroon societies within the academy to help you keep doing the work that you want to do within it. I do. Absolutely, absolutely. It's one that has been kind of emerging from the movement in ways that feel really resonant to me. I'm a spatial person more than anything else. And so understanding what my orientation is, what is my orientation to power, instead of just being my rebellious teenager self, being very seriously accepting, as Rod was talking about, Lama Rod was talking about yesterday. How do we accept our proximity to power? How do we love it? And so we can leverage it differently instead of it using us or weaponizing us against ourselves and others.
You use the word integrity. Would you illuminate that word, unpack it further?
So it's a structural, like, and it makes me think of how do you know a building has integrity, is structurally sound, right? Making sure that the foundation is built in such a way that the roof won't collapse in on itself. I think about it in terms of how we probably we're gonna do some centering work in a little while. And in centering work, it's really about how are you using your relationship to the thing that's holding you, the ground, and building up enough, like in mountain pose in yoga, building on the foundation of your relationship to the earth to hold yourself up, but also hold yourself together, right? So I think of it physically first, and then I think about it in terms of like this brilliant, dizzying intellect. Is it connected to my core? is it connected to my heart? Am I able to be accountable to what my body needs as my brain tries to figure out all of the things, right? How can I integrate what I know I should be doing with what my body is practicing and begin to integrate those lessons, not just when I show up on the cushion, not just when I show up for a public talk, not just when I'm having a good day, but even on the off times when I don't feel well, when I'm triggered, when I'm in the middle of a conflict, right? When I'm dealing with incredible loss or something unexpected. Integrity is being able to come back to that integrated core, right? So integrity definitely feels like something that in a human spirit isn't as stable as a physical building, right? But it's a practice of coming back into alignment between heart, mind, and body so that we can act with our full selves instead of just letting one of our aspects of ourselves run ourselves amok, which is what we tend to do. And in the academy, it's usually our heads, right? So like I even sit like this, my head is out, my neck is, my shoulders are crunched, right? Everything is about our heads. And Zoom calls, we don't have full body shots, we don't have people standing up and giving lectures. It's all about the head, right? And so integrity for me is about having a more integrated relationship with my intellect and my heart and my body so I can be more fully present to my community and to the world as it is. And to work out of whatever authenticity comes up there. And if it's not enough, right? If it's not right, if there are people who have issue with it, I have the space then to be receptive to that new information and adjust if needed, right? So there's a flexibility there. There's a trust there that maybe I won't get it right the first time, but I hope I can make it a little bit better next time.